that computers don't see context. And I was watching an interview, one of the last interviews from Isaac Asimov, and he said that's the big problem. The computer doesn't get the difference between bare naked and bear in the woods. And of course, you could be bare naked with a bear in the woods. And human language is full of all those nuances. And language is fairly straightforward. I mean, compared to, say, facial expressions, the nuances, intonation. If you just take the language, they kind of get what's going on. So let's dive into data and context a little bit. We'll get into dashboards and instrumentation, and I have a history in that. If you remember, we talked about 5 or 6 clients where context, not looking at what we had, not looking at what we should have had, or what we could have had, or a different way of using something we hadn't thought about, those are the way we made millions of dollars. Cabela's said we made $2.5 million almost just on one mailing, the first drop, because we didn't use recency in the spring. And I'm in one of those a little bit right now. Baseball, we started a multi-million dollar, what became I think $10 million division just by going after the businesses that were buying from them already. Same with Cabela's. We did that also with Cabela's. So anyway, we won't go into that again. You've heard that before. I'm going to probably splice them all together. But I started business out of college selling or working at a company that sold industrial instrumentation. And one of the things they sold was dials and gauges and switches for paper machines and that sort of thing. And the car industry is coming around, and mostly we see analog gauges. They're digitally portrayed, but mostly it's analog. And there's a huge reason for that. They don't do it as well as we used to. And right now, whatever this process control is turned off, right? But you can see that some of the high points when it was last turned on before these dials were reset, all of these dials have high points of exactly the same point. They're all pointing, well, from your perspective, they were all pointing about like that, okay? A little below horizontal. Same with this one. And then these two were midpoint, and then these two are back to almost horizontal. Why? Why? I'll tell you why. Because a good panel, what I was taught by the veteran people who knew what they were doing, they said a good panel, all the dials, all the needles on all the dials should show about the same angle. So that if anything's wrong, you don't have to look at the numbers on the dial. It's irrelevant. The numbers on the dial are just additional detail. But the angle, if the angle is set to always be the same across the panel, then a glance at the entire panel can tell you if there's something amiss. And that was before we had lights going off and bells and whistles and all the rest of it. That's a very profound thing. What we did was we take out the context because we chose the range of the dial to fit the situation and to fit with the other dials, so that an okay situation was going to be reflected in the angle, and that is just a key to data portrayal. Now, while I was involved with that company, while I was working there, the digital displays came out, and everybody wanted to go to digital. It was funny. There was a company that came in with a mag meter. Mag meter is something that senses the deflection of a polar fluid like water They make a magnetic field, and then water flowing through it will deflect the field. You can put a magnet next to a stream of water, and you can see it bend the stream of water. Well, so the water affects the magnetic field, and the magnetic field affects the water. But it's a good way to measure something like sewage that you don't really want to get in there with a propeller that you're going to have to clean out, and it's going to get stopped up, and everything is going to be bad. So this mag meter, the interesting thing is it only had like 3 digits. This one has 4, maybe 4, but probably not even. Probably 3. And I said, why is it so few digits on that thing? And they said, well, it's a funny thing. When we first built it, it had like 5 or 6 digits. And, that was sort of appropriate because we're moving a lot of stuff and we can sense the flow with that sensitivity. But he said what would happen, in a sewage treatment plant, the spec on that flow is, let's say, 10 feet per minute or 100 feet per minute. So it's, kind of a right through there. And if you make an adjustment upstream, it takes minutes to get downstream. So let's say it was supposed to be 100, and they saw that it was 98. Oh, we got to get the flow a little higher. So they'd increase open the valve a little bit. Well, a couple minutes later, it would start to go up. 99, 100, 101, 102, 103. Uh-oh, too far. Close the valve a little, and they said they'd spend all day trying to get it to 100, and it never would get there. And it didn't make any difference. And so too many digits, they found quickly in the instrumentation business, too many digits could be very unproductive. You ever thought of that? How too many digits could be unproductive when in the digital age? Very, very easy. Here's a modern passenger jet, and you can see now what they do, because they rarely go through that work of getting everything to set just right. They have little lights. See all these little red things going off? Those little lights are attenuators. Alarms, if you will. They're alarms. Beep, 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 and then they can look at the gauge. But the elegance is gone because the engineers don't even remember back in the day when we were forced to have multiple gauge scales and an art. It was an art building a good panel. And this is what we get today. We get stuff that if I went into these, you would see much of it has no context and doesn't make a bit of sense. Looks nice, looks great on this screen, but it just doesn't tell a story. And that's what we're after. We're really after telling the story, because that's how we assess the world. We don't assess the world in digits, right? We assess the world in the story that it tells. It's not so easy to understand what we see and what we assess. You watch a pool game and you see the cue ball strike another ball and send it into the pocket. But David Hume, British philosopher, pointed out that what you think you see is the cue ball causing the 12 ball to go into the pocket. I think that's a 12. Anyway, but what you really see is one ball starting up, coming to a sudden stop, and another ball suddenly accelerating very rapidly in another direction. Now, conservation of angular momentum suggests that there is a causal relationship, but that's not what we see with our eyes. What we actually see is one ball stopping, another one starting. What we infer, what we observe is causal. What we see is not. I'm John Miglosh. Like and share. We'll keep this series going. Thank you for visiting.